Max Orr, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you're well. And Patreons, you have given us a ton of absolute epic Friday morning questions. Every single week as a loyal Patreon, we take care of you by making sure we give you the opportunity to answer any question you want about your fantasy, dream team, or SuperCoach side right throughout the week. And then on a Friday morning, this sneaky little episode pops up where I give you my thoughts on every single one of these players and the questions that you've asked. We love having you a part of our Patreon and our family. So thank you so much for jumping on board. At whatever tier level you're in, we're just thankful and grateful for you. If you haven't ever put a question in yet, it's never too late in the season. We're only at round 6, a quarter of the way there. So still plenty of the year. So if you've never got a question in, but you love being a part of our Patreon, jump on board and get involved in those comments and those questions. If you are getting involved, hopefully some of the advice that we're spitting out and shouting out your way is of some benefit and help for you. All right, let's roll through these questions that you have asked for this week. Corey Blackledge, for AFL Fantasy, he wants to know this. Is it okay to get Colby and Clark out and bring in Garcia and Graham as he can't get to anyone else? So he's got another question that's sitting there as well. I think what you're talking about, Corey, is you can't get to the premium tier players that you really want to get. So you're in this luxurious position, for sake of a better phrase. I think a lot of the communities here this week where I've got cash cows that are at or nearing our topped out price. And I think I could almost regenerate some cash bank, a couple of 100,000, and keep that cash generation movement with the hope of future weeks being able to make some on-field improvements to your side. Really critical too, given we're heading to best 22 next week, or a traditional scoring round. I don't mind the idea of moving off of McKercher. I think he's done his job for us. While I do expect he will pick up mid-defensive status at the end of this round, and so it'd be a dual position player, I'd be quite comfortable to move him off this week for the very reason a Colby to a Graham, for example, nets you triple figures cash. So I'm really quite comfortable with that, and I've got no problem with it. The Garcia to Clark approach, again, at time of recording, which is a Friday morning when we do these, Garcia's already played. So, Corey, you might have already made the move. And if you've got Garcia, I think that's fine. You knew it was a guaranteed option that wouldn't get subbed. That's okay. The Butler injury that looks quite serious, that hamstring, might help luck factor here for you a little bit, because the Saints do have a ton of players starting to roll back into this side over the next 2 to 3 weeks. And they were poor last night as well. So change could and would come, but Garcia has looked solid for you. The only reason I wouldn't move off of Clark is I'd just make sure, Corey, you're looking at all the other options first, that while yes, Clark is a quote unquote dead or near dead cash cow, you're not really going to get much more money out of him. Is there something else you could do with that trade? That's the only thing. I don't think it's a bad move. I would always just go, well, what else could I do? If I hold Clark, what could I do? I just encourage you to look at that. Already, you've probably made your decision given the fact that the game was Thursday night and we give you this podcast and record this podcast early on a Friday. So I hope that helps. Second AFL fantasy question Corey has asked is, when is the right time to get Gawn from Cherry and also to get Steele? Well, Steele, the good news is you can now wait a couple of weeks. He was running right towards a 7-figure player, but with that high 80s score last night, it means he's no longer a high urgent priority for you. And despite him being so popular, owned in the top 1,000, the top 5,000, the top 10,000, which is ultimately the pack you're either a part of or chasing. His lower score this week just makes him much more financially attainable. So I don't think he has to go to the top of the tree for you now of trade targets, and neither probably would he have been when you've got the likes of Errol Goulden under 950,000 this week and next. Jordan Dawson will eventually be really, really priced at an incredibly attainable and attractive level. Clayton Oliver I think we're all watching what he could be over the next fortnight to make some decisions. Tuke Miller and that Gold Coast Suns run really does start to open up now. Caleb Sarong, after a quieter game or a couple of quieter games, is going to come back towards that 950, 960,000 price point where he started. So Tom Green, you could probably throw in the mix. So I just don't put Steele like as the urgent ahead of these guys anymore. So I think you just need to prioritize your upgrade cadence around it all, but that's there. And then when's the right time to get Gawn from Cherry? I'm not convinced that Gawn is a clear and supreme top liner. In contrast to, say, a Marshall and an English. I think he's been awesome for us to the start of this year. He's been brilliant. He couldn't have performed any better. But these are missed points for you now. These have been relatively favorable matchups for Max too. And last night, we saw the best of Tim English and some of the worst of Rowan Marshall. So to me, yes, personally, I'm at this stage telegraphing Cherry to English rather than Cherry to Gawn. I'm not a Gawn owner in AFL fantasy. To me, that's where I'm going because I think there's a little bit more value in it. But I think you do need to look at moving. Personally, I think it's about round 9. That's the right time to get off Cherry, or you're running him through to his bye. But yeah, Gawn's fine. I just don't think he's clear and supreme top 2. I think it's a conversation between those 3 of the top 2, but I don't think it's definitive that from here, Gawn will be a clear and supreme top 2 ruck. That's my only thoughts. Henry is gone. Is it too late to trade in Heaney next week? Oh, Henry, it must have been painful for you over this past couple of weeks. And last week was really the only week that's given you some respite in it as well. Just watching Heaney go on a tear week on week on week. I think there's a couple of ways you can approach this, Henry. And it ultimately comes back to what is your mindset of what you hope to achieve. It is really the sentiment and the statement, I would say, behind it. And what I mean by that is leagues your focus or is overall rankings your focus? That informs a lot, because if it's just about leagues and you couldn't care about your rank, well, now it's actually about what are the next 2 to 3 weeks of matchups looks like, because outside of that, it doesn't really matter if 4 or 5 other players have Heaney. So if league is your focus, Henry, look at your fixtures of who your opponents are and what their teams are, and then make those moves. If it's about league rankings, well, unfortunately, all you're doing now, because you've taken Heaney on at his hardest point, where he was values, made a lot of money. He's pushing now 950K, and he's got a high 90s break even. So you could argue he's near, if not at, peak price already. What you're just doing is playing a defensive and a protective trade to bring him in now. Again, do you need and or like to do that, or are you wanting to get more aggressive? Who are the forwards you could be targeting? I know some are still bullish on Zorko, and I think from an average perspective, he'll be there. But I feel like I've said it on a number of different platforms now on the Coaches Panel podcasts and video episodes that I just don't trust his games played. And with injuries to Zach Bailey, I know they've brought in Lions this week. It does feel like to me that I just don't trust Brisbane's continuity to give him full games and play him every week. And it just feels like I'm biting off a risk that I don't really want to have. The value forward that really has to get talked about, and it's not going to help you this week, Henry, is Jack McRae. He looked back to his best. Yes, there was no Libba, but it's not just about getting centre bounce opportunities. It's about the ball movement of the Bulldogs as well. And so I've got him guesstimated at around that 715, 720K next week. Like, you want a value forward that could pop 90 from here on in, like amazing value given what you're paying for. So he would be that. It's not too late to trade Heaney, but you have missed out on 150,000 or so of cash generation and a captaincy option every single week for the past 5 weeks. So Henry, not too late. I feel like you have probably reacted too late, unfortunately, but it's not too late to bring him in. all it's going to do is it's no longer going to hurt you going against him. I hope that helps you kind of process those elements through Henry. An AFL fantasy question from Adam. Forward thinking to next week, it'll impact his trades this week. Good, it absolutely should. Each trade you make should inform the secondary trade of the week, or the third trade of the week if you've got SuperCoach. I know you don't play it, Adam, and neither is your question about that, but every trade should not only protect, but should be linked to what your future movements are. If you don't know what you want to do in a week, even if you don't know the player, but you've got the intent of ideology, then you could be doing some trades in the existing here and now that does kind of throw you off a little bit. His question is this: how viable is it to trade out Jackson next week? I don't like the thought of his role with Darcy in it, but it's slim pickings in the forward lines. For context, I'll have Dempsey and Wilson as two rookies with Jackson, and we'll likely need to play Lazaro Garcia if I trade him out. There's not a world that I would say your highest trade priority this week, let alone next week, is to trade out Luke Jackson. You've alluded to the fact, and Henry's question was similar. It's one of the common questions we get from not just Patreons, but just anyone in general here at the Coaches Panel is, what do I do with my forwards? I think it's really clear. Heaney, to this point, has been better than we could have imagined. You could throw Tom Powell into the mix. He's become the breakout forward that we'd hope to be able to jag the Fisher types, the Fife types, the Jordan types. Powell was the one that's popped up to that level, and Flanders was always going to be a high priority once we knew security of role and the style of game from the Suns. He again. So I think we can put a three clear top liners that, as long as their roles in their team don't have drastic changes, they're the three top liners. Jackson, from now, I don't know if he can do enough to be a top six forward, but you don't need him to be that in AFL fantasy, Adam. He is, not only is he protecting, keeping a cow off the field for you, where people can pop 50s and 60s. That's what Wilson has been doing mostly. Gallagher has been doing no. So I know you don't have him, but to me, it's just protecting that. And you're about to head into best 22s. And all it takes this week for Luke Jackson in this matchup against West Coast is to pop a ceiling score, which he can do as a 50-50 share forward. And all of a sudden, that money is back on again. So yes, he's priced at $800K and has a 107 break even and has made a reasonable amount of money for you. Like it's not a crazy amount, but what are you, like 30-40K up from his starting price and giving you points? Can you move him on next week? Yes, Adam, of course you can. But for me, rather, I would be prioritizing where I could. Can I get a Cadman up? If you're a Cadman owner, for example, can I get a Garcia or a Lazaro up to, like I said, it's going to be give or take $300K to get, using Cadman as the illustration, knowing you don't have him. So it may be bad. Lazaro, what, $300K from Lazaro up to a Jack McRae? Like, that's huge. So yes, you could do Jackson, but what, you're not really gaining anything in your forward lines unless it's Powell, unless it's Flanders, unless it's Heaney. I don't feel like what you're going to trade into is any greater confidence of scoring security. And so if it means I drop $30,000 and he goes back to his original starting price, but I've protected a few crappy cows scores on field, then so be it. So for me, Adam, I'm okay with Dempsey on field for as long as I need. Wilson, I don't think is a bad, like his baselines are 50 and that's not horrible. I know it's no longer best 18 after this week, but that's not horrible for a forward cash cow. So I don't think you should need to be in a rush. Rather, I'd be looking, okay, you've got the Goulden likes at a really attainable and available price. Dawson at a really attainable and available price really, really soon. That whole midfield premiums that we talked about this week on the podcast are all available over the next 2 weeks. I'd prioritize that and the top three forwards that I've mentioned over any of the other moves.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like, to check you have the tickets in your wallet first before you drive 2 hours to the big game. Seriously, you had one job. Now the closest you'll get to the 50-yard line is parking lot D. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
Ben wants to know thoughts on if we can field Closey or Graham in AFL fantasy this week. I'll answer your question for that, and then I'll broaden out specifically. The answer is yes, you absolutely can. And where able to, I'd be looking to do some loopholing if you can. Now, in your defensive line, it might be a little bit easier, depending on who you've got through there. But if you're a Blake Howes owner, for example, he's a really easy one to be able to flip onto the field, and you can start looking at some loopholes. For example, if you're a Zach Williams owner, the Giants aren't a great matchup on paper for him, but without Sard in the side, he might get a little bit more responsibility of ball movement. We saw him score quite well against the Crows. Now, whether it's causation or correlation that Sard goes off, he scores well, or he just manages to, build his fitness and he's now finishing games scoring like he was starting scoring. Again, causation, correlation, we just don't know when we're sitting outside of the football club all the nuances of that. But for example, you could put a Williams on your bench and then you can loop it on or off with a Graham or a Closey, with Howes, for example, sitting there. Maybe you've still got a Gibcus. I hope not, but maybe, again, some with that, with Richmond having the bye, you could do that. Personally, if it was a 50-50 dance, who I would trust more, for me, it's Closey over Graham. When I look back at last week's match for Graham, he was fantastic. Let's give him his flowers here and not be knocking him whatsoever, but 14 tackles feels really highly unsustainable. Like, he's got the same tackle count combined of Matt Rowell, who's one of, if not the best tackler in the AFL, and Holman, who's the pressure forward for the Suns. He got the same combined amount of tackles as them. He got more tackles combined than Ginnivan, Mitchell, Nash, and Scrimshaw last week. Like, 14 is huge. And can he do it again? Of course he can. Once you've done it once, the answer is of course. But we're looking at sustainable scoring. Closey did it off 28 possessions and a couple of goals. Graham did it off mid-20s possessions, 14 tackles. So, all right, both feel high, but Closey's done it now 2 weeks in a row. Graham, I think, what was he in AF? Went 60-odd the week prior and then popped the ton. So if I had to field one, if I could only do one, Closey's the one that I feel more confident will deliver me a 80-plus score. But if there's the opportunity to look at loopholing one for the other, then I'd absolutely seriously take a look at it for sure. And again, that's where a Williams, for example, might be able to do. If he gives you a 60 or 70, all of a sudden a Graham can come on. And you get the opportunities for both. Now, again, you got to factor in things like, is Wilson on the field already for you? That 60-odd score might drop out. Similar with Rowan Marshall owners. You're going to hope that, crazy enough, he was a really obvious vice captain call last night. Everything pointed to a good score. So don't feel bad about putting the VC on him. A lot of really good coaches did. All the matchups indicated, all the markers indicated he was going 120 last night and just didn't. And then we're digressing now. St Kilda did the right thing by Rowan. That being, they plonked him forward in the last quarter and they gave him an in-game rest. This is good news for Marshall owners that while, yes, you got a crappy score, yes, you can't consider your vice captain, you've got to go chase a captain and consider options there, is with a longer break for the Saints. They've come off Saturday to a Sunday game, I think it was last week, including some travel. They're now going to head into round 7. They've got that Friday night game in Adelaide. They've got a full 7-day recovery. I think that's really, really strong and fine for me. So Marshall owners, this has been good for you. I know we've gone off a tangent away from Ben's question, but we were there, so we had to tackle it. To answer it clearly, Ben, Closey, I have more confidence in. We'll go 80+. But if you can loophole a Graham, then I would look to those options. And for me, a Zach Williams playing early Saturday, a Howes on field if Williams pops. If not, all of a sudden, Graham can come on field and hopefully he can maximize it. Live, laugh, right? Oh, I love some of these names. G'day, CB Legends. He's in a bit of an awkward spot this week in AFL Fantasy. He's currently ranked 373. Gosh, that's a good awkward spot to be. He slid 150 spots last week as a non-Sheasel owner. Yep, that's a painful spot to be, mate. Is it points chasing to go Shees from Stewart, or is that what I need to do to keep in touch with the top 100? Thanks, guys. It's actually a really important question to kind of consider. I think the top 100 to a degree is a little bit of a polluted ideology at the moment. To be top 100 to now, you've clearly had a bunch of different guys that have been absolutely firing. And one of them, for example, would be a Max Gawn. He's not available to coaches this week. And so unless they've gone the three-headed ruck monster of Gawn, Grundy, and Cherry, as all value options to start the year, you're running 21 spots available to you this week. And so, because you're not trading out of Gawn, you're just not doing that. And so it's just misleading with that, let alone all it takes is one rookie on field difference could be 60, 70 points. Your captaincy considerations could have 60, 70 points. So you're in an incredible spot, mate, even without the defender that is able to and currently looking at taking a season away from you. And so could you or should you look at moving Stewart to Sheasel? You could. However, there's a couple of little caveats I would say there. Number one, if Finn McGuinness is going to any player this week, wouldn't Sheasel be one of those options? Yes, it could be LDU, but politely, he's not looked at his damaging best. Couldn't Hawthorn go, you know what? The place that we think we could minimize the impact of North Melbourne beating us is their rebound off defensive half and making life difficult for Sheasel. Could they and would they send McGuinness to him? Well, potentially. We'll wait till 5 o'clock Eastern to find out whether or not he makes the 22, but potentially that's probably one of two options that they kind of roll through there. And I think that would make a little bit of sense, given a Nash, for example, from a body perspective, if they still want to run him through the midfield, can keep LDU physically accountable at stoppage and centre bounce. So that might help you out a little bit. Live, laugh, Liam Ryan. So for that reason, I'd have some caution just for the week matchup this week. There could be that telegraphing that you just need to keep an eye on. I also think Geelong against Brisbane, relatively interesting matchup. Stewart's been good for us. I wouldn't say he's been awesome. I wouldn't say he's been poor. I think he's been good. But really, you're looking at a fair ton of cash to be able to jump up from one to the other. And so if I look at that right now, Stewart's priced at 852, whereas Sheasel, you're throwing, over 150K, closer to 200K to get up there. What can you do with that 200K that's going to improve your points on field in other ways? I'm not saying you shouldn't get Sheasel. I think at some point, mate, you absolutely have to do it. And he's probably the guy that could take your rankings and your season away from you, given so highly owned he is and where you sit in the mix of that. So he's absolutely a red hot concern for you. And I don't want to downplay that, but I also don't think this week it's the only move you could make to offset that. If McGuinness stays in the 23, okay, this gets interesting now. And you've got a decision to make. Personally, for me, if I was in your position, I would be that 150, 200K. If I had my heart set on making an upgrade, what else could I do with that money? Well, Stewart, I think he's going to be around the mark of the top 6. I don't have him as a clear top line, lock him in as a top 6 defender. I think I'd say Whitfield, absolutely no problems at all. Sheasel, absolutely. That comments from Alistair Clarkson mean he's going to stay a halfback for a really long time. Nick Dacos, absolutely. And I'm really quite confident to put Nick Martin in as a from here on in, who I think are the best defenders. Stewart's in a pack that's hunting around for kind of top 2 spots are the best 6 defenders from here. I think he's going to be top 10 from here, no problems. But I don't know if I would have Sheasel to Stewart as the most important trade you could make this week. Yes, I get he's taking the year away from you and he's going 120 every week and a captaincy option, but with McGuinness matchup potentially on the cards this week, with money moves you can make in other areas this week, I'd be considering all other options. Personally, I would look at something else first before that, because on any given week, Stewart could match Sheasel. That would be the worst, is that you spend 200K and they're scoring switches, which is absolutely possible. So I'd be looking at other options without knowing the other 29 spots on your field, though. Live, laugh, Liam Ryan. Couldn't answer it in full. You're welcome to reach back out and direct message us, and we'll do what we can to help. But I'd be looking at other avenues. But yes, getting Sheasel in is going to need to be a high priority for you sooner rather than later. Jimmy Johnson, SuperCoach question. For those that picked or skipped Nick Dacos, is Dacos the number 1 premium trade in priority now in defense and mid lines? It's a good question. It goes on a little bit more. He's given some team context, which I always like when people give me that extra little bit of context. It just means I'm not taking a stab in the dark a little bit on some stuff. So he's given some context. He's a Sheasel, Yo, Stewart, Bont, Green, Steele, Rosie owner. He doesn't own Luke, Ryan, Powell, Sarong, Butters, Merritt, or Miller. Okay. For me, I would say, of all the guys you don't own, Miller, Merritt, Butters, Sarong, Powell, and Ryan, the most attainable right now for you is Nick Dacos. Priced just over 566,000. He's dropped 83K. He's got a break even this week that is based on his standards, and I think for most people, a 108 is very highly attainable. And given the fact that he's going at that as his average, and that's very, very comfortable. This score of 54 from a couple of weeks ago as he heads into this matchup against Port Adelaide is about to roll out. And then after what could be an interesting matchup against Port, which we'll talk about in a moment for you, Jimmy, this is where they go. Essendon, Carlton, West Coast, Adelaide.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Fremantle, Bulldogs, Melbourne, North, and then the bye. So potentially a Hewitt runs with him. Sure. Potentially a Durham runs with him. Sure. Potentially a Drew runs with him. Sure. Potentially a Keys runs with him. Sure. Potentially a lot of things could happen. But for those that skipped Nick Dacos, you did it for 2 core reasons. One was a concern of a Finn McGuinness tag, which happened, but the score impact wasn't there. It was the 2 weeks earlier, the St Kilda Bazaar matchup. So in totality of the 5 weeks, you got the 106. You got him down 83K. It worked. It absolutely worked. But the plan was then always, sooner than later, to get him in. Because could Dacos take a season away from you? Absolutely he could. The Pies are far from looking anything like at their brilliant best. And in SuperCoach, he's already rolled us 2 130-plus scores. He's already given us another 2 additional scores over the ton marker. And he's coming up against some teams that historically he scores really, really well against. So can you fade him for the Port Adelaide matchup this week? You can, but I'm not concerned about it. Willem Drew's not playing that pure negating role. I think Port Adelaide have got that midfield mix looking much healthier than they have over the past couple of seasons. So I'm not as concerned, is probably the wrong word because I've never really been concerned, but I'm not, oh no, he's got Willem Drew. He's going to go an 80 on me. I just don't see that happening. So to me, I'm really quite comfortable and confident that Dacos, for non-owners, if you are in the market for trading into a premium, he should be right in the mix. And if it's not this week, it's absolutely next. The other ones that should be priorities, have you got the forward options that you need? Because for a lot of teams, we are about to get a threshold busting level of DPP options into our backline. The Bonners, the Martins, the Roberts. If you're holding McKercher, he's about to flood through the back. So you're about to get some, so you don't need him, quote unquote, but the timing is right to get him this week and or next week. After that, you are no longer playing with house money. You are potentially making some risks for you through there. So it's this week or next for me with Dacos. I know some would say he's not done anything to yet. I would say no, he is done as a fader of Dacos. He has done you a favor and he has gone your way. And now that you have won that gambit run, don't lose what you have gained by going against him, by thinking it's going to keep always coming up your way. Dacos is too good of a footballer that within a period of a week, he can pop a 150 on you. That 30K that he makes in that format, all of a sudden, you're now going to miss him because you're like, I'll get him. I've got enough money. It's like, now I can't. Now I can't. And very quickly, players like this that you know you want to have, and he's at arguably his bottomed out price now. If it's not this week, it's next. I don't like risking going away from them too long. So is he the number one premium trade-in priority now? No, it's always team dependent. If you're not a Flanders owner, that's hard to go against it. And it's because we don't have as strong a forward option that we do in the defensive line. We've already asked questions about Closey and Graham and Williams and Roberts. And we're going to be and are stocked in the back line right now. So he's not a need from a squad, but he's important from a structure and a trade cadence and a plan. That's all I'd say. I hope that answers your question. Andrew, AFL Fantasy current rank is 1906. Well done, mate. You've got 6 rooks on field. Jordan to Butters, Walsh, or Dacos got 4 mid rooks, looking at getting a 700K forward next week. Well, that 700K forward might luckily be presenting itself to you in Jackson McRae. Again, what I would say to you, Andrew, is have you got those, what I would say are the 3 really important forwards that to date, and what I do forecast moving forward, are going to be in that top echelon of forwards. And that's Powell, that's Heaney, that's Flanders. I don't think Powell's essential that you have to trade and get him now, but to this point, he's been really, really good. And as long as he's holding that role, I don't see a world where he doesn't average 90 for the foreseeable future in that space. So that's why I keep putting those 3 in the mix. So for me, Andrew, I would say Butters and Walsh are fine to get, but in about 2 weeks' time, or even next week, you're about to get a bunch of guys that will be at that 900K-ish range that potentially you may rate at a greater or higher level. So, for example, Christian Petrarca, he's off this week. He's got a break even that's over 130, and he's at a comparable price. Like it's 3,000 different to what Sam Walsh is. In a Petrarca versus Walsh, from round 7 onwards, who do you like more? It's a good question. In a couple of weeks' time, you're going to have available to you at that price point a Rory Laird, a Jordan Dawson. There's a world where, Bont's going to drop down a little bit more again. Like he's going to be closer to sort of 930 for us, 940 for us. Do you like and trust him a little bit more? I certainly do. If for me it was wait a week. Now you might not be in the interest of it now, but could you get your 700? Could you get your premium forward this week? Could you get your Flanders type that you don't have? Again, I don't know if you've got these guys, but could you make that move? Because the 700K forward, I don't think McRae is going to be. You can afford to wait the extra week and pay the 750. And it gives you that week of data with Libba in the side, if that was your concern or the reason you thought it was. You get to see if that ball movement's back, the rolls, all those kind of things. To me, getting into a Bontempelli in 2 weeks' time, or even as early as next week around that 940, 930K marker, yeah, like that feels more appetizing to me rather than getting a Butters and a Walsh, because Butters has been good. He's not been a bad pick, but he's not been amazing. And Walsh, it was a phenomenal game, right? It is a phenomenal game. But it's not about what they've done to this point. It's about what they do from here. So for me, Jordan up to a top liner, I think is a good move. Dacos makes a lot of sense for why we've just explained a few moments before. But what's that forward line looking like? And what's that trade you want to make in a couple of weeks' time? If you ask me honestly, do I think Butters or Walsh from here to the end of the year could go 105 plus? My answer is yes. I think they can. Do I think they can go from here on in 110 plus? My answer right now is I don't. Which means I've got some guys that I think could go 110 plus. Doesn't mean they will, but I think could go 110 plus over the next 15, 10 weeks of the year that make them more prioritized for me. And even if it's 20, 30K difference, I'm kind of happy to spend that. So I don't think you can go wrong with any of those three options. I don't think any are going to be the reason you've got a bad season. You're clearly in a great rank, Andrew. But for me, if it was out of those three, I would pick Dacos. I think he's the only clear top liner of those three in his specific line. And then it's looking at who are the guys you could get in 2 weeks' time that right now you haven't got to, then prioritize for that. Jacob Graff, could you go early with Cherry to Marshall when looking at their coming runs? Oh, I hope you didn't do this, Jacob. I hope you didn't do this. Or is it better to play safe and get a McKercher and D'Ambrosio to one of those 650K forwards? For me, the better option would be banking coin. I just don't like getting into this speculative range for no apparent reason. Now, in a week's time, it's different where McRae's sitting there and we'll get some information and data from the coach. There'll be some comments beyond just the press, the post-match conferences. We'll get to see, we'll know what the price point is. We'll know what the DPPs are and get to see the uniquenesses in our team. But I never like going, I've got a cash cow that's topped in price right now in McKercher. And on that, I'll get to it in a sec, but there's a way where you hold McKercher, but getting rid of a McKercher because he's at an unattainable break even more than likely this week. D'Ambrosio's done his job for us in our team. And now, well, got to spend the cash, right? Well, no, because next week, what can and are you going to do next week? So the Cherry to Marshall move, you've already done that or not done that. If you've done that, it was too early. And that's not just because Marshall went poor, but it was just too early. There was still some money and some decent matchups sitting there for Cherry. Rather, it was I'm thinking about round 9, where you're looking, I'm personally looking at a Cherry to English. You might want to do Gorn, and that's fine. You might also have Gorn. Fine too. But that's where I'm kind of telegraphing another 3, maybe max of 4 weeks with Cherry, and then it's time to move.
It feels like you can get your credit scores anywhere these days. Random websites, card statements, budgeting apps, heck, even your dog might bark out a few numbers. It's true. Credit Karma isn't the only place you can find them. But we actually do more with your scores to help you find your next financial opportunity. Like a more rewarding credit card, a game plan that helps you pay down debt faster, or a personal loan to help you save more on interest payments each month. Cha-ching! The possibilities are kinda endless. Download Intuit Credit Karma today to get started.
But these guys have done their job. Personally, I'd be bankrolling a little bit of cash so that next week I could get uber aggressive and get into some great options that are still sitting there. So for me, that's what I'd be doing. The way you hold McKercher is you're potentially over the next 2 to 3 weeks losing $50,000, knowing that he will pick up defensive status, and you're going to run him right through to North Melbourne's mid-season buy, and you're hopefully going to recoup some of the lost money that you're getting now with an intent to hold him for longer. It's the same mindset of how coaches Personally, I think Sanders was a bit more of an obvious hold. I know a few people jumped off, but for me, Sanders now picks up forward status in my eyes. Based on his time on ground and where he played. He was already just above the threshold anyway, and there was nothing that I saw in that game that would indicate he's changed that threshold percentage enough to make him lose the likely gain of forward status. I could look like an idiot in a few days, but wouldn't be the first or the last time that I say something and it absolutely goes incredibly wrong. So to me, I would take Kirch and D'Ambrosio down, and I'd hold some cash. If there's nothing that you love that's there, and not just the best I can afford. The moment in round 5, you're looking at the best I can get is the phrase. That's the wrong mindset and a kind of a trigger thing for me that when I go, oh, the best I could get is, okay, I'm looking at this wrong. I'm thinking only about this week and I'm not thinking about future weeks to come. The second option Jacob has put in there doesn't feel very safe, but as a Dawson owner, I'm tempted by Rankin almost as insurance if the change is real. I do think it'll be really ballsy for the Crows to move away from doing what they saw worked with Rankin. So I don't think that's changing. So to me, I'm not so concerned about the Rankin thing changing. And Carlton are a hard matchup to score. And the Crows fixture does start to open up over the next couple of weeks with a North Melbourne matchup Friday night against the Bombers. I think it will get easier for the Crows and we'll start to see a combination of easier matchups, better ball movement, and just confidence in the team, see them turn around a bit. But again, Rankin, value for sure, but an element of risk associated to it. And so I don't think that's a calculated risk that I feel confident in doing. Part of that is it's very, very quickly that the Crows forward line needs him back there again. So to me, I'd take the Cows. I wouldn't jump into Rankin just yet. I think you can sit and look at some other options. Wayno, gosh, I'm taking a bit of time on these questions. That's all right. I don't mind taking time on your questions. Thanks for the advice. Really appreciate. Currently sitting in the top 5K in AF. Well done, mate. And my best week finishing top 600 last week. Good on you, man. Now the next step. He's got Gawn covering for Jackson. Oh, sorry. Reverse that. Jackson covering for Gawn. But he's concerned about Darcy coming back. I've heard both cases of get out now and no worries here. He's checked the DFS without good boy. And Jackson's floor is 35 with Darcy and 79 without. Break even of 107. Even with the Bailey bounce, he won't be making much money. I can get up to Marshall with Jackson and get Garcia or Graham on the other side of the trade. The only downside is I need to trade Cherry next week. I don't think you need to trade Cherry next week, but I understand what you're saying. You might still have 100K to make, but that could get him day cost. That could get him Walsh. Bench hygiene looking good. D'Ambrosio, Sexton, I wouldn't say that's good then. Sanders, McKercher, Clark as areas of concern. Is it better to maintain bench health or focus on points with 5 out of the next 10 games being best 18? Love that you are asking this question, Wayno. The fact that you're thinking about the mid-season buys is a really good move. I think so many coaches have only thought about this first 6 weeks of the year and have done things with their team that they're not even thinking about what their team looks like in another 6 weeks when we re-enter best 18 again. So I think that's really wise of you to be thinking that way. Now, the move to Marshall, we got to put that to a side now because it's all hypothetical and hindsight commentary around that. I hope for your sake you didn't do that. You can say that's for hindsight reasons if you like. I would say it's for matchup reasons this week, given that Jackson has a good matchup against West Coast. Now, is it a gravy matchup? No, it's not, but it's a good matchup. And why it's a good matchup is he's been the number one ruck and been doing well. He's going to play second fiddle for chunks of this game. And he's going to come up against, politely, players that are not AFL standard second rucks. And that's okay. It's where West Coast are in their rebuild right now with their tolls. And with how their tolls are developing, they're not anywhere near what Luke Jackson is. And so in the ruck, he's going to have a field day. Up forward, it's going to be a little bit harder than I think people realize. Barras and McGovern are playing really well. And so last year where tolls were all over them, it doesn't appear to be the case this year because some of their mature premiership stars are back in full health and full form. And so he's not going to have it easy. That said, I don't see how Fremantle don't win this game by a minimum of 10 goals. I know West Coast get up and about for the derbies, as they should. But Fremantle are just that good. And West Coast played a really undermanned Richmond last week. That, when West Coast are beating you that bad, like clearly you're in trouble. And Richmond's trouble's not just injuries. It's they haven't even hit ground zero of their rebuild cycle yet, but they're doing what I just mentioned. They're old premiership stars. So many of their good players are injured at the moment. And you take 10 of any team's best players out and you're going to struggle at AFL level a little bit. Personally, for me, Wayno, if you want to know my thoughts, the matchup of West Coast this week is too potentially good. And even if he drops 10K, that I could be trading out of 80 or a 90. And I think that's more likely to be the baseline this week, an 80, where I'd have to potentially field a 60 cash cow. And so that's a 20-point differential in a best 18 week, which honestly, that's a huge swing in a best 18 week. Huge swing in a best 18 week. So personally for me, I would be looking at not moving on Jackson this week, regardless of Marshall and regardless of that. Rather, I would be looking at, yes, Graham, if you're not a Graham owner, it is a high trade priority this week. And then you've got Garcia. I think he's fine. Personally, I'd lean more towards, in terms of job security, Biggie. I would have lent to this time 24 hours ago. The Butler injury kind of opens that door of Pandora a little bit more to not be as clear. But to me, Nugent looked really, really good last week. And I felt like, given the amount of time the ball's going to sit in that defensive line of North Melbourne, I feel there's a bit more role and job security, but that might have opened up a little bit more. To me, it's better for you to focus on your bench hygiene, getting rid of Sexton, right? Getting rid of McKercher, getting rid of D'Ambrosio this week or next, Clark, if and where you can, then potentially gaining 10 to 15 points this week. That money that you make with these little cash cows in and out moves, pocket you. Each of these moves will pocket you 100 to 150K downgrade each, let alone the reignition of money being made for you, Wayno, in other spots. So for me, that would be the case. Ben, who would you trade out of Howes or Gallagher? Too hard to answer that now because Gallagher's played. My answer would have been pre-game. If I'd be trading others out ahead of those two. But if those are your worst two options, the question is not who are you trading out of. The question is who you're trading into. And that for me, and how are you doing it, is always the question. It's never who are you getting out of. Okay, great, cool. Yep, break evens, buys, all that kind of stuff. What are you doing with it? Because Gallagher has shown, and he did it in this match, well, he passed his break-even marker. So the concern that, oh no, he's a dead, and I thought he was close to a dead cow last week with that 20-odd score, but he's shown he's got 90s within him. And so it's never was always as doom and gloom as many might have thought and predicted. So if I was honestly answering it, in the way back machine of 24 hours ago, I would have said, personally, I'd prefer neither. I would have looked at what other options I had. But then the question is always, who are the guys you're moving into and how are you getting there is always the greater priority. It's hard to answer now, Ben, because Gallagher's played. And so you've either made the trade or you're not. But I think Howes is fine to hold with no Christian Salem for the next couple of weeks. I think he's going to get back to giving us a bit more consistent 60s and 70s. I don't need any more defensive scoring options, but if we can squeeze another 30 to 40K out of him over the next week or two, that could be the difference between getting into the Bontempellis, Sarongs, Greens, uber big boys that you want to get to once they've bottomed out into their price. So hope that helps. Last three questions. AFL fantasy question from Dylan. A bit cash strapped. Should I be double downgrading? Close. He has Closey and going to bring in Graham, which is great. His current trades are McKercher and Sanders for Lukosius and Graham. He likes the Lukosius pick after meeting the eye test. Look, I don't hate the Lukosius trade in. Look, the Sanders thing I'm not a fan of, but if you've done it, you've done it. I don't think it's going to be a bad decision to have traded out Sanders. I wouldn't say it's a good decision either, but I don't think it's going to be a bad move for you, Dylan, to do that, because yes, he's going to start losing some money, and it's going to be at least 2 to 3 weeks before that reignites back again. And 3 subs over the first 6 weeks does indicate certainly that in any given week, if he's named, he's wearing red or green at the start or the end of the game. So absolutely, it could be a really good move. But Lukosius, for me, the challenge I have about Gold Coast is in a 6-week period, Hardwick's moved a lot of the magnets around. We were talking about heading into opening round, excuse me, and round 1. What's the CBA cadence of Flanders? How much centre bounce opportunities do you get? Well, no one's talking about that now heading into round 6. We're talking about him getting kick-ins and playing off half back. We're talking about Sexton being one of the best value buys at the start of the year, who's a guy that's got this locked distribution half-back role in our forward lines. Connor Buderick, this great role as the lockdown defender and then pushing up to distribute. Well, both those two guys are gone now. They made, what was it, 9 changes 3 weeks ago in their team. So Hardwick's happy to swing the magnets and make some really big moves. And so while Lukosius is in this back line at the moment, well, who's to say he doesn't revert back in a week or two again? And so to me, Lukosius, while he does pass the eye test, and I understand what you're saying about that, he's priced at 629,000. He's got a break even of 57. He's gone triple 80s in a row. So he's good. Don't hear me wrong. He's good. But I don't know. That doesn't feel like double downgrading. To me, I'd be looking at, well, have I got any dead options on my bench that I could reignite cash generation? Because in a best 18 week, an 80 is fine. I think Coach is an 80s guy. That's fine. Now, you might be thinking, oh, hang on, you just said, what if Jackson goes 80? That's better than a 60. It is. But Jackson's ceilings is 120. I don't see in this role how Lukosius, on current form, does anything more than a mid to high 80s, maybe pushes 90s. So potentially you're making this trader and maxing out the money you could make, because Sanders and McKercher do have a lot of money built into their names. You're basically meaning you've got no money set aside for next week. And so that goes, okay, well, are you a non-Dacos owner? Do you have the plan of how you can get that move? Are you a Cherry owner? What's your plan to upgrade to him in a couple of weeks' time? Are you wanting to capitalize on a falling price point of a Bontempelli in another week, or a Dawson in another 2 weeks' time, or a Clayton Oliver in 2 to 3 weeks' time? I'm not saying save cash for no reason. What I am saying is don't just put it onto somebody because you want the extra 20 points for this week. If you like the pick, Dylan, and it passes your eye test, go for it. Absolutely no problem with it. You got to back yourself in sometimes. To me personally, I don't love the Lukosius move this week. But if you're like, nah, I like it. He's going to give me 80s on field. I'm going to bank 20 extra points this week. And doing so does not hurt my plans for the next month. Knock it in. Go for it, Dylan. As long as it's not hurting what you want to do in the future, my answer is go for it. It's not what I would do, but that's beside the point. If it's not going to hurt what you want to do, then go for it. Shay has a question, AFL fantasy related. A lot of AFL fantasy questions on this one. You've got about 400K cash coming into this week. Wow. With Short, the injury has to go. I agree. He does. You're looking at going Short down to Graham, leaving you 805K in the bank, dude, to do whatever I want. McKercher likely being the other out. So he's asked this question. Who do you think is more of a priority? Goulden, Dacos, Walsh, Flanders, Anderson after last week, or Rosie Butters? Who should I get at least before their round 13 bye? I don't think Rosie or Butters are super high priority this week. You're clearly looking at the mid-season bye, which I think is right, and you should be prioritizing those guys. Rosie's been a great starting option, but he's pretty much sitting around that ecosystem of price that we started with him for those that started with him. And similarly with Butters, they've both kind of held value. They've done what they needed to do as their baseline. A little bit more is always nice, but they're not knocking the door out. And they've had a really good fixture to this point too. What was that? West Coast? I think they've had North Melbourne too, off the top of my head. I could be wrong, but they've had a good fixture. Of those names, Flanders to me is a greater priority than Dacos this week. And the reason Flanders is a greater priority is because the options of what we've got to put on field in the forward line is not as strong as the options at the lower level than we have in our defensive line. We are having already and will have in a period of 48, 72 hours, a ton of defensive options. And so Dacos, I know I've said how important he is as a pick. He is. But Flanders is kicking off a Gallagher, a Reed, a Wilson, a Nugent, a Cadman. These probable 50 to 60 guys most weeks.
Whether you're ordering wings for the game, whipping up a 7-layer dip, or ordering pizza, there's something about football that makes you want to eat. And this football season, Uber Eats has the best deals on game day food. No matter what you're craving, from 2-for-1 pizza to buy one, get one wings, Uber Eats will be dropping new deals each week, all season long. Uber Eats, official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. Order now. Terms and conditions apply. See app for details.
Or a guy that in this current role feels like as one of the safest hundreds we could get. And so you're protecting your team's overall scoring health and getting someone that outside of Dacos, all those other names, as good as they are and as top line pedigree as they could and quite possibly will be, Flanders and Dacos are the only guys that I have hand on heart, extreme confidence that they are going to be top of their line options. Hand on heart. The others are very, very good options, but these are hand on heart, top of the line options. So to me, given the cash that you've got and the break evens, the field of who's on field and what you can do over the next fortnight, like if you've got 800K, let's say 400 of that goes from McKercher up to a Flanders, you're still going to have enough money next week to get Dacos via Williams. Dacos, and have some money left over, by the way. Dacos via Cadman, almost with a little bit of extra money if you can make it off your secondary trade, which is huge. So to me, I think you can get Dacos in a week. I think Flanders is a higher priority to me, so I would do that. To me, that's there. Last question from Paul Erickson. Can I hold McKercher? You can. I could go D'Ambrosio and Jordan to Graham and Goulden, or is it better to go McKercher to Garcia and Jordan to Goulden and miss Graham? I don't think you can afford to miss Graham, Paul. You'll bank more points on field this week. Your team value and your cash generation will slow as a result of that. I don't forecast him going 100 again, like he did against Hawthorn last week, but another 3 or 4 weeks of 60s just means he's going to pop up 100, 150K really easily for you without having to do too much. And his role in that side looks really secure for the next couple of weeks. He's picking up center bounce attendances too, which is, really impressive with the movement of Flanders to the halfback. That kind of 4th and 5th banana in the midfield spot has opened up and he's taking his chance through there. So you absolutely can do it. But as you mentioned, it's linked to holding McKercher. And if you're holding McKercher, you're not jumping off in the next 2 weeks because you're losing money. Anywhere from here on in, you're losing money because his break even is so high that even if you went back to that halfback role, it's unattainable based on what he's done to this point. And so rather, it's a longer term play of you're holding him for rookie job security. You're holding him for the DPP pop that will come in on Sunday night. And you're making that move with the anticipation and expectation that it'll be a mid-season move off and hope that he can reignite that cash generation in 2 to 3 weeks' time when he bottoms out and all of a sudden can pop an 80 or a 90. And in totality, you might end 30 to 50,000 ahead of where he is right now, which is really, really possible. Like McKercher's if you want to trade him out this week, I would not talk anyone out of doing that. If it gives you the moves you want to make, I have no problem with that. But a break even at 87, that's pretty attainable for him. Now, he's not done that since round one, but if he goes and gives us a 70 this week for owners, he's not bleeding that much money. He gives it a 70 the next week. Well, he's pretty much based out, and all it takes is him to pop a 90, and he can get back to where he is now, let alone where we'd hoped he'd been before the sub. Really quite easy. So to me, the priorities of trade, if I was to do it, is if I was getting rid of D'Ambrosio down to a Graham and a Jordan to a Goulden, I really like that if you hold McKercher. A McKercher and Garcia and Jordan to a Graham and a something in the forward line, quite like that too, as an option. Who can you get? Are you a Flanders owner? If not, fix that up, Paul. Are you a Heaney owner? If not, okay, here's your chance to fix that up. So I'd be looking at all those options, but is there a way you can hold McKercher? Yeah, of course there is. There absolutely is a way you can hold him. It's just, again, you're not then jumping off him next week because he will drop money unless he pops a 90 for you this week. So just make sure that you're thinking longer term. And I like the way you're thinking, but Graham is the trade-in priority for you, for your team's not just bench hygiene, team value, but cash generation. And if that means you can still get Goulden, fantastic. If you can't, no problem at all. You can still correct that over the next couple of weeks. Hey, Patreons, I love these questions. I love that I also just get to take that little bit of extra time with you and answer these questions and break down some of my mindset and thought process behind that either helps you just think through the dilemma a little bit, or just gets you a little bit of a sneak inside my brain for a little bit, which I know is a scary place to be, but helps you kind of figure out how I think about the game. And if it's the way you do too, and it helps you, fantastic. If it's not, the best thing when you hear someone break down their trading or their mindset of how they approach the game is it's not about I'm right, you're wrong, you're right, I'm wrong. That's not the right way to look. It's going, okay, how do they think about that? And making you process and think about the game. And that's only ever a good thing when it opens up your mind to have conversations and ideologies about the way you could approach fantasy football. Hey, good luck this week. I know as you're listening to this, you're already one game definitely down, potentially a couple. We hope you're well. Please reach out, Patreons, either directly in the Patreon app area or anywhere else that you can get in touch with us, but right in the Patreon app or in some of the hidden community groups that we've got available to you on your tiers. Get involved with us. Different members of the panel are involved in every single one of those. And if we can help you out as a loyal Patreon, we want to be able to do that. Hey, good luck. Our final week of best 18, no Tigers, no Ds, but still plenty of great things that can come hopefully for you this week.